Some wounds run deeper than the eye can see, and the cruelest ones come from those who should love us most. Sarah McKenna learned this truth young, born different in a town that demanded sameness. With skin pale as winter snow and hair white as cotton, she became the daughter her family chose to hide. While other girls her age walked freely through town, she stayed behind locked doors, invisible to a world that had already decided she wasn't worth seeing. Her father turned away. Her mother made excuses. The neighbors whispered their judgments. Then a stranger rode in a giant cowboy named Colton Reed who saw something nobody else could. What happens when one man's heart proves stronger than a whole town's prejudice? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun rose over Sage Creek, Wyoming territory, painting the dusty streets in shades of amber and gold. It was the kind of light that made everything look softer, kinder than it really was. Sarah McKenna watched it from behind her bedroom curtain, the way she watched everything in her life, from a distance, through glass, separated from the world by more than just a window. She was 22 years old. Though sometimes she felt ancient, worn down by years of whispers and turned heads. Other times she felt like a child, inexperienced in the ways of life that happened beyond her family's front door. The contradiction lived inside her like two people sharing the same skin, one who had learned patience and quiet strength, another who still ached for the simple freedom of walking down Main Street without causing a stir. Her reflection in the small mirror above her wash basin showed what everyone else saw first. Skin so pale it seemed to glow in lamplight, hair the color of fresh snow, eyes a shade somewhere between pale blue and violet. Albinism, the traveling doctor had called it years ago, speaking the word like a diagnosis, a condition to be managed. To Sarah, it was simply who she was. To her family and the good people of Sage Creek, it was a mark of difference they could neither understand nor forgive. The McKenna house sat on the respectable end of town, a two-story structure with a wraparound porch that Thomas McKenna kept painted and proper. Appearances mattered to her father. Everything had to look right from the outside, even if the inside held secrets and shame. The family Bible sat on the parlor table, its leather cover worn smooth by generations of McKenna hands. Sarah's birth was recorded there in her father's careful script. Sarah Ann McKenna, born April 3, 1860. Just her name and date. Nothing more. Her sister's entries included phrases like a blessing and perfect in every way. The omission said everything that needed saying about her place in the family. Order. Thomas McKenna ran the lumber mill on the edge of town. He was a hard man, made harder by life and expectation. 53 years old, with shoulders still broad from years of physical labor and a face that rarely showed warmth. He had built his reputation on reliability and plain dealing, and he guarded that reputation the way some men guarded gold. A daughter like Sarah, different, strange, the subject of gossip, threatened everything he had worked to build. Margaret McKenna, Sarah's mother, was softer in appearance, but not necessarily in action. She had learned long ago that survival in her marriage meant going along, keeping quiet, not making waves. She loved Sarah in the way water loves stone present but eroding, wearing away at the sharp edges until nothing remained but smooth, resigned acceptance. Margaret's silence hurt more than Thomas's open rejection, because Sarah had spent years hoping her mother might speak up, might defend her, might choose her daughter over her husband's pride. Then there were the sisters. Emily, 25, had married a banker's son 2 years prior and lived 3 houses down with her husband and infant daughter. She was pretty in a conventional way, with brown hair and hazel eyes that knew how to look demure in company. Catherine, 19, still lived at home and made no secret of her relief that Sarah's existence made her look better by comparison. Where Emily's cruelty was passive, Catherine's came with edges, sharp little comments that drew blood. Sarah's days followed a pattern worn smooth by repetition. She woke before dawn, dressed in simple clothes her mother had sewn high-necked and long-sleeved, as if fabric could hide what everyone already knew. She helped prepare breakfast, though she ate separately in the kitchen, away from the dining room where her father preferred not to see her. She spent her mornings on household tasks, mending, sewing, cleaning. Her hands were skilled, her stitches small and even. She had made most of the curtains in the house, the tablecloths, the samplers that decorated the walls. None bore her name. Afternoons brought reading. Sarah had educated herself through books, volumes her mother quietly acquired and left in her room. She read everything: novels, poetry, history, philosophy. The words opened windows her family kept closed, showed her worlds where difference might not matter so much, where a person could be judged by character rather than appearance. The lace handkerchief in her pocket was her own work, delicate and precise. She had spent 3 months on it, working by lamplight after everyone else had gone to bed. The pattern showed a meadow full of wildflowers, each bloom distinct and detailed. It was beautiful, and it was hers, and no one would ever see it. That was the bargain she had made with invisibility. She could create, could pour her heart into her work, as long as she did it quietly, privately, without calling attention to herself. The few times she had ventured into town over the years remained burned into her memory. The stairs, the mothers pulling their children close, as if albinism might be catching. The young men who looked through her as if she were made of glass. The old women who crossed themselves when she passed. Once, she had tried to attend church. The preacher had stumbled over his sermon, distracted by her presence in the back pew. Afterward, a delegation had politely suggested to Thomas that perhaps Sarah might worship at home, where she would be more comfortable. Where everyone else would be more comfortable, they meant that Mrs. Dawson at the Mercantile was different. Elderly and practical, she had known hardship herself, a husband lost to cholera, children who had moved away and rarely wrote. She treated Sarah like a person, spoke to her directly on the rare occasions Margaret brought her along for shopping. "That's fine work," she would say, examining Sarah's embroidery. "You've got a gift." Small kindnesses, but Sarah hoarded them like treasure. The town itself was typical of the Wyoming Territory in 1882, rough around the edges, trying hard to become civilized. Main Street boasted a general store, a bank, a smithy, a saloon, a church, and a scattering of other businesses. The railroad had come through 5 years back, bringing new people and new money. Ranchers and homesteaders filled the surrounding valleys, their cattle and crops slowly taming the wild grasslands dot. It was a place that valued conformity and hard work, where everyone knew everyone else's business, where reputation could be built over decades and destroyed in an afternoon. Social hierarchy mattered. The banker and the preacher sat at the top, followed by successful merchants and ranchers. Below them came skilled laborers, farmhands, drifters. Women's status derived from their fathers and husbands. Their worth measured in beauty, propriety, and the ability to manage a household without causing scandal. Sarah existed outside this structure entirely. She was neither valued nor dismissed. She simply wasn't counted. The town had decided long ago that she did not quite qualify as a full person, and everyone, including her own family, had accepted that judgment. On this particular morning, Sarah finished her chores and retreated to her room. From her window, she could see the street below, could watch the life she was forbidden from joining. The baker's wife walked past with her basket. 2 ranch hands rode by, heading for the saloon. Children played in the street, their laughter rising like birdsong. She was about to turn away when movement caught her eye. A group of riders was coming into town from the east, pushing a small herd of cattle ahead of them. Cattle drives came through occasionally, men moving stock from summer to winter range or to the railroad for shipping. They usually meant a few days of increased business for the town, some rowdiness at the saloon, then departure. But something about these riders made her pause. Even from a distance, she could see they moved with purpose, discipline. Not wild cowboys, but working men who knew their business. And at the front rode someone who stood out even in silhouette, a man so tall he made his horse look small, sitting easy in the saddle with the confidence of someone who had spent more of his life outdoors than Sarah watched them pass, disappearing toward the other end of town where the stockyards waited. She felt the familiar ache of longing, not for anything specific, but for the possibility of something different, something more than the careful, quiet life she had been assigned. Downstairs, she heard her father's voice, discussing business with a client. Catherine was practicing piano in the parlor, the notes stumbling and starting. Her mother moved through the house with her usual quiet efficiency. Everything was as it always was, as it always would be. Sarah returned to her sewing, needle flashing in the afternoon light, creating beauty no one would see. Outside, the town went about its business. The cattle drive settled in. The sun moved across the sky, and in ways Sarah could not yet imagine, everything was about to change. Colton Reed had seen enough of the world to know that beauty came in forms most people never bothered to notice. He had watched sunrises over Montana mountains that could make a grown man weep. He had seen foals take their first trembling steps, all legs and determination. He had held his wife's hand as she died, and even in that moment of unbearable loss, there had been something profound in her peaceful surrender, a kind of grace that transcended suffering. At 35, he carried his height like a man who had long since stopped apologizing for it. 6 feet 5 inches of muscle and bone, weathered by sun and work, his face lined in ways that spoke of laughter as much as hardship. His hands were scarred from rope and leather, capable of both strength and gentleness. He moved with the economy of motion that came from years of ranch work, nothing wasted, everything purposeful. The cattle drive had gone smoothly. 20 head of prime stock, purchased from a rancher in Montana and destined for a buyer near Cheyenne. Colton and his 3-man crew had made good time, and Sage Creek offered a convenient place to rest and resupply before the final leg of the journey. The town looked like 100 others he had passed through: wooden buildings, dusty streets, people going about the business of living. They had settled the cattle in the stockyards and the men at the boarding house. Colton had taken a room for himself, but found he was not tired despite the long day's ride. Restlessness moved through him, the same feeling that had been his companion for 3 years now, ever since Martha died. It was not quite grief any more. Time had softened those sharp edges, but a sense of incompletion, of life suspended between what was and what might be. He kept a journal, a habit Martha had encouraged. "Write down what you see," she had told him. "Otherwise the days blur together and you forget you were alive." The leather-bound book was worn now, filled with sketches of landscapes and brief observations. He was no artist, but the act of putting pencil to paper helped him process the world, made him pay attention to details others missed. That afternoon, he walked his horse through town, letting the gelding stretch his legs after the confines of the drive. The animal needed water, and Colton preferred to ask at a residence rather than use the communal trough. Something about the courtesy of asking permission, acknowledging that you were a guest in someone else's territory. The McKenna house looked well-kept, prosperous, a good place to request water. Colton tied his horse to the fence and walked up the path to the front door. Before he could knock, the door opened and a man emerged, middle-aged, stern-faced, dressed in the dark suit of a businessman. "Help you?" Thomas McKenna's tone suggested he was more interested in moving Colton along than actually helping. "Wondered if I might water my horse, sir." "Happy to pay for the courtesy." Thomas studied him with the assessing gaze of a man who judged quickly and changed his mind slowly. Pumps around back. Help yourself. Much obliged. Colton touched his hat brim and turned to lead his horse around the side of the house. That was when he saw her. She stood in the doorway Thomas had just vacated, half in shadow, half in light. The contrast made her seem almost ethereal, as if she might vanish if he looked away. Her skin was the palest he had ever seen on a living person, her hair white and caught up in a simple bun. But it was her eyes that stopped him pale blue, wide with something between fear and longing, looking at him as if she had never seen another human being before. She was beautiful. Not in the conventional way, not in the way men usually meant when they used that word. Beautiful the way a winter landscape was beautiful, stark and pure and entirely itself. "Ma'am." Colton nodded to her, the same courtesy he would show any woman. Her lips parted in surprise. No words came, but her expression shifted into something like wonder. "Sarah!" Thomas's voice cracked like a whip. "Inside, now." The woman Sarah flinched but did not immediately move. Her eyes held Colton's for another heartbeat, and in that moment, he saw everything. The hunger for connection. The years of being told she was less than human. The small, fierce spark of dignity that had somehow survived despite everything. Then she was gone. The door closing softly behind her. Colton stood very still, his horse's reins loose in his hand. Something had just happened, though he could not quite name it. He had seen countless people in his travels, and forgotten most of them within days. But he knew, with the certainty that sometimes comes without explanation, that he would never forget the woman in the doorway. "Your horse," Thomas said flatly, gesturing toward the pump. Colton led the gelding around back, filled the trough, let the animal drink its fill. Thomas watched from the porch, arms crossed, making sure Colton did not linger or look back at the house. When the horse was satisfied, Colton touched his hat brim again. "Appreciate the kindness." Thomas said nothing, just watched him go. Back on Main Street, Colton found himself heading for the Mercantile. He needed supplies anyway, and Mrs. Dawson, who ran the place, struck him as the type who knew everything worth knowing about a town. The store smelled of coffee and leather and the indefinable scent of dry goods. Mrs. Dawson stood behind the counter, white-haired and sharp-eyed, assessing him the moment he walked in. "Passing through?" she asked. "For a few days. Resting stock before we push on to Cheyenne. You'll be wanting beans and coffee then. Maybe some bacon." "Yes, ma'am. And information, if you're inclined to share it." Her eyebrow rose. Information usually costs more than bacon. Colton smiled. He liked directness. "Fair enough. I'm asking about the woman at the McKenna house. The one with—" He stopped, unsure how to describe Sarah without reducing her to her appearance. "Albinism," Mrs. Dawson supplied. "That's Sarah, Thomas McKenna's daughter, though he treats her more like an embarrassment than family." "Why?" "Because people are fools." Mrs. Dawson began assembling his order with brisk efficiency. She was born different, and this town decided different meant less. Her own father hides her away like she's something shameful. Won't let her go to church, won't let her walk through town. Keeps her locked up in that house like a prisoner. Colton felt anger kindle in his chest, slow and hot. She done something to deserve that treatment? Only crime she committed was being born. She's bright, kind, talented with needle and thread. Mrs. McKenna brings her work to me, sometimes beautiful stuff, fine as you'd see anywhere. But Sarah's not allowed to take credit for it. Can't have people knowing the albino girl has gifts, I suppose. That's a hell of a way to treat your own child. Mrs. Dawson looked at him with something like approval. You'd think so. Most folks around here see it different. They think Thomas is being protective, sparing her the cruelty of the world. Truth is, he's the cruelest one of all. Colton paid for his supplies, his mind working. She ever have callers? Men interested in courting? Men? Mrs. Dawson laughed, but there was no humor in it. Men in this town won't even look at her straight on. They act like she might turn them to stone if they meet her eyes. She's 22 years old and hasn't been courted once. Hasn't been treated like a woman at all, just a problem to be managed. He thanked Mrs. Dawson and left, his supplies bundled under his arm. The sun was lowering toward the mountains, painting everything in shades of orange and red. Beautiful, but Colton barely noticed. His mind was full of pale blue eyes and the careful dignity of a woman who had been told all her life that she did not matter. That night, in his rented room, Colton opened his journal. He usually sketched landscapes, but tonight his pencil moved. Of its own accord, trying to capture the lines of Sarah's face, the way she had stood in that doorway between shadow and light. The sketch was rough, inadequate, but it helped him think. Martha had been gone 3 years. The grief had been crushing at first, a weight that made it hard to breathe. She had been 5 months pregnant when the fever took her, and Colton had lost not just his wife, but the future they had planned together. For a long time, he had not wanted to feel anything, had thrown himself into work until exhaustion made sleep possible. But time moved forward, whether you wanted it to or not. The grief had gradually transformed into something else. Not forgetting, never that, but a kind of acceptance. Martha would not have wanted him to stop living. She had been too full of life herself to want that for him. Find someone who makes you remember how to smile, she had told him once, during one of those conversations couples have when they are young and think death is far away. Don't spend your life alone just because I'm gone. He had promised, though at the time it seemed like a promise he would never have to keep. Now, looking at the rough sketch of Sarah McKenna, he felt something stir that he had thought was dead. Not love, he barely knew her, but recognition. The sense that here was someone who understood what it meant to survive loss, to carry on despite everything. The next morning, Colton rode back to the McKenna house. He had thought about it most of the night, weighing the wisdom of what he was about to do. He was a stranger here, with no claim on anyone's time or attention. Thomas McKenna had made it clear Sarah was not available for socializing. The sensible thing would be to finish his business and move on. Colton had never been particularly sensible. Thomas answered the door, his expression darkening when he recognized his visitor. I gave you water yesterday. What more do you want? Wondered if I might speak with your daughter, sir. The silence that followed was heavy with threat. My daughter is not available for conversation with drifters. I'm not a drifter. I'm a rancher and cattleman. I own land in Montana, run a small operation. I'm 35 years old, widowed, no debts, no bad habits. And I'd like to make Miss Sarah's acquaintance, with your permission. Thomas's face went red. My permission? You think I'd allow a stranger to court my daughter? I think she's a grown woman who deserves the same respect and consideration any other woman would receive. I think keeping her locked away is a crime. I think you know it. For a moment, Colton thought Thomas might swing at him. The older man's fists clenched, his jaw tight. But something, maybe recognition of truth, maybe just exhaustion, made him step back instead. You don't know what you're asking for, Thomas said finally. People will talk. They'll judge you. Let them talk. Colton met his eyes steadily. I've been judged before. I've survived it. Thomas looked at him for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Not acceptance, exactly, but a kind of weary resignation. 5 minutes, on the porch. And if she tells you to leave, you leave. It was more than Colton had expected. He nodded. Fair enough. Thomas disappeared inside. Colton waited, his heart beating harder than it had any right to. He heard low voices, a woman's surprised exclamation. Then the door opened again, and Sarah emerged, blinking in the sunlight like someone emerging from a cave. Up close, in full daylight, she was even more striking. Her eyes were not just pale blue, but had hints of violet, like mountain lupine. Her skin had the translucence of fine porcelain. She moved carefully, as if unused to being looked at, unused to taking up space in the world. Miss Sarah. Colton removed his hat. My name is Colton Reed. I apologize for the intrusion, but I wanted to make your acquaintance proper-like. She stared at him, and he saw tears gathering in her eyes. Not sad tears, he thought, but the kind that came from being seen after years of invisibility. Why? Her voice was soft but clear, educated. Why would you want to know me? The question broke his heart a little. Because you seem worth knowing. And because I think you've been treated poorly by people who should have known better. A single tear escaped, tracking down her pale cheek. She brushed it away quickly, as if crying in front of him was another kind of shame. You'll be judged, she said. People will say terrible things. I don't care much what people say. You should. But she was smiling now, just a little, the expression transforming her face. This town has a long memory and a cruel tongue. Then maybe it's time someone reminded them that cruelty isn't the same as righteousness. He took a step closer, still careful, still respectful. Would you mind if I called on you again tomorrow? She looked back at the door where her father undoubtedly stood listening. Then she looked at Colton, and he saw the decision being made. Saw courage gathering itself in her pale eyes. I would like that very much, Mr. Reed. Colton returned the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Each visit, Thomas grew slightly less hostile, though no more welcoming. He allowed them 20 minutes on the porch, always within sight, always chaperoned by his disapproving presence in the doorway or window. It was more than Sarah had ever been given before, and she treasured each moment like something fragile and precious. They talked about simple things at first. The weather, the cattle, the land. Colton described Montana with words that painted pictures, mountains that scraped the sky, rivers so clear you could count stones on the bottom, meadows that turned purple with wildflowers in spring. Sarah listened with an attention that went beyond mere politeness. She was absorbing the world through his words, seeing places she had never been allowed to go. You make it sound beautiful, she said during their third visit. It is, though it's hard country too. Winter comes early and stays late. The work never ends, but there's a freedom to it. You can see for miles, and nobody tells you what to think or how to be. Sarah looked down at her hands, folded carefully in her lap. I can't imagine that kind of freedom. You should have it. The words came out fiercer than he intended, and he softened his voice. Every person should have it. On the fourth day, he brought her a gift. Nothing expensive or improper, just a handful of wildflowers he had picked that morning. Purple and yellow blooms that had been growing by the road. Thomas frowned at them, but Sarah took them with hands that trembled slightly. They're lovely, she whispered. I haven't held flowers since I was a child. She pressed one between the pages of a book later that day, a secret treasure she could keep. The flower, a purple lupin, became her talisman, proof that this was real, that someone had thought to bring her beauty from the world beyond her prison. Gradually, Colton began to share more of himself. He told her about his childhood in Kansas, about learning to work cattle from his father, about the restlessness that had driven him west. He told her about the war. He had been too young to fight, but old enough to remember the divided loyalties and bitter aftermath. He told her about building his Montana ranch from nothing, about the satisfaction of creating something with your own hands. And finally, during their second week of visits, he told her about Martha. We met at a church social in Helena. She was the preacher's niece, visiting from Denver, had red hair and a laugh that made everyone around her smile. She was sunshine in human form, always seeing the good in people, always believing things would work out. Sarah listened without interruption, understanding that this was sacred ground. We married after a 3-month courtship. Her uncle performed the ceremony. We had 2.5 years together, good years working the ranch, making plans. She got pregnant the summer of '79. We were so happy, picking names, building a cradle. Then the fever came. His voice remained steady, but Sarah saw the grief still living in his eyes. She died on a Tuesday morning in September, the baby with her. I buried them on a hill overlooking the valley, where she could see the mountains she loved. "I'm so sorry," Sarah said softly. "I was angry for a long time. Angry at God, angry at the world, angry at myself for not being able to save her. But Martha wouldn't have wanted that. She believed in living fully, in embracing joy when you found it. She made me promise, near the end, that I wouldn't shut myself away from life." He looked at Sarah directly. "I think she'd like you." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Sarah felt her heart racing, felt hope and fear warring inside her chest. "Mr. Reed, Colton, please, Colton." The name felt strange and wonderful on her tongue. "You should know that I come with nothing. No dowry, no prospects. My father has made it clear that if I marry against his wishes, I'll be cut off entirely. And the man who chooses me will be choosing to be an outcast alongside me." "I've been alone for 3 years," Colton said quietly. "That's its own kind of outcast. At least this way, I'd have company." A smile tugged at Sarah's lips despite herself. "You don't know me well enough to make such declarations. Then let me know you better. Let me court you properly. Take the time to do this right." Thomas's voice came from the doorway, sharp as glass. "Time's up, Reed." But something had shifted in those words on the porch. Sarah stood, and for the first time, she met her father's eyes with something like defiance. "Mr. Reed will be calling again tomorrow, Father. I hope that's acceptable to you." Thomas's jaw tightened, but he gave a curt nod. Small victories, Sarah thought. Small steps toward a larger freedom. That night, Sarah sat in her room with the pressed wildflower and began work on a new project. She had been sewing since she was 6 years old, her small hands learning to create beauty even as she was taught to hide herself away. Now she worked on something special, something meant just for Colton. A handkerchief, white linen with embroidered edges. But this one would carry a picture, a landscape of mountains and valleys, worked in shades of blue and green and gray thread. It would take her weeks to complete, working by lamplight after the household slept. But she needed to give him something, needed to express what her words could not quite capture. The courting continued through the following week. Colton brought her a book of poetry Wordsworth, carefully chosen for its themes of nature and transcendence. He brought her stories from his travels, carefully edited to be appropriate for a young woman's ears. He brought her his attention, his respect, his genuine interest in who she was beneath a striking appearance. Sarah, in turn, began to emerge. Our conversations grew longer, more confident. She shared her thoughts on the books she had read, her observations about the world she watched from her window. She was witty, Colton discovered, with a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh. She was intelligent, well-read, thoughtful. She was everything he might have hoped for in a companion, if he had allowed himself to hope. But the town was watching. Mrs. Dawson reported the gossip to Sarah on one of Margaret's rare trips to the mercantile. "They're saying he must be simple-minded to show interest in you. They're saying you've put some kind of spell on him. They're saying it's unnatural." Margaret, for once, spoke up. "Let them say what they want. Mr. Reed seems a decent man, and Sarah deserves happiness." It was the most her mother had defended her in years. Sarah treasured those words almost as much as Colton's visits. Not everyone was hostile. Mrs. Dawson made her approval clear, telling anyone who would listen that it was about time someone treated Sarah McKenna like the lady she was. A few of the older ranch hands who knew Colton's reputation spoke well of him. But the weight of disapproval was heavy and growing heavier. Catherine made her feelings known at dinner one evening, her voice dripping with false concern. "Father, aren't you worried about what people will say? About our family's reputation?" Thomas set down his fork carefully. I'm more worried about standing before God one day and explaining why I kept my daughter from a chance at happiness. Reed's a good man. I've asked around. If Sarah wants him, I won't stand in the way. The words cost him. Sarah could see it in the tightness around his eyes, the stiffness in his shoulders. He was making a choice between his pride and his daughter, and the choice was harder than it should have been. But he was making it nonetheless, and Sarah felt a complicated gratitude. Emily, surprisingly, was the one who came to Sarah's room that night. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded, her expression troubled. "Are you happy?" she asked. "Yes," Sarah said simply. "He's so much older than you, and he's a stranger. And once you leave with him, you'll be gone from us forever. I've been gone from you for years, Emily. You just didn't notice because I was still in the house." Emily flinched. "That's not fair, isn't it? When was the last time you spoke to me at dinner? When was the last time you introduced me to your friends or invited me to hold your baby? I've been invisible to you because it was easier than standing up for me." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. "I was afraid. Afraid if I defended you, they'd turn on me too. I know." Sarah's voice softened. "I don't blame you, Emily. Not really. Fear makes us do terrible things. But I can't live in fear anymore. Colton sees me. He treats me like I matter. That's worth more than safety." Emily left without another word, but Sarah saw her wipe her eyes as she closed the door. The handkerchief grew slowly, thread by careful thread. The mountains took shape, their peaks sharp against an imagined sky. The valley below showed tiny details, trees, a river, a small cabin. It was her vision of Montana, her dream of the life she might have if she was brave enough to reach for it. 2 weeks into the courtship, Colton's tone turned more serious. They were on the porch, evening settling over the town, when he took her hand. The first time he had touched her beyond a formal handshake. "Sarah, I need to be honest with you about what this will mean. I'm planning to settle permanently. I've been looking at land near here, thinking about starting over. But if we marry, if you choose me, we'll face hostility. Not just from the town, but possibly from your family. Your father says he won't stand in the way, but he also won't give his blessing. You'll be walking away from everything familiar." "Everything familiar has been a cage," Sarah said. "I'd rather have freedom with uncertainty than safety with chains." He squeezed her hand gently. "You're braver than you know." Or more desperate. But she was smiling. "Colton, I won't pretend this is easy. I'm terrified, but I'm also alive for the first time in my memory. That's because of you. Because you looked at me and saw a person worth knowing." "I see a woman worth loving," he corrected. "If you'll have me, Sarah McKenna, I'd like to marry you. I can't promise you wealth or ease. I can't promise that people will stop their whispering or their judgment. But I can promise that I will honor you, respect you, and stand beside you against whatever comes. I can promise that you'll never again be invisible or alone." Sarah's tears came freely now, no longer shameful but cleansing. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." He pulled a small object from his pocket, not a ring but a carved wooden horse, no bigger than his thumb. "I made this for you. It's not much, but it's the work of my hands, made while thinking of you." She took it carefully, admiring the simple craftsmanship. A horse in mid-gallop, mane flying, captured in wood. It represented freedom, movement, life unbounded. "It was perfect. I'm making something for you too," she said. "It's not finished yet, but when it is, I want you to carry it with you, as a reminder. I don't need a reminder, but I'll treasure whatever you give me." That night, Sarah worked on the handkerchief with renewed purpose, her stitches swift and sure. The landscape was nearly complete. Soon she would give it to him. This piece of her heart worked in thread and cloth. Downstairs, she heard her parents' voices raised in argument. Thomas defending his decision to allow the courtship. Margaret, for once, standing firm beside him. Catherine's shrill protests. The family fracturing along fault lines that had always been there, but were only now becoming visible. Sarah felt a pang of regret, but it was small compared to the hope blooming in her chest. Tomorrow, Colton would return. Tomorrow, they would begin planning their future together. Tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after that, she would no longer be the hidden daughter. The family shame, the woman too different to deserve love. She would be Sarah Reed, wife, partner, woman who had chosen courage over fear, freedom over safety, love over loneliness. The handkerchief lay across her lap, nearly finished. Just a few more hours of work, a few more careful stitches, and it would be ready. A gift from her heart to his, a promise made in thread and cloth. Outside her window, the night was vast and full of stars. Sarah looked up at them, these distant lights she had watched for so many years from behind glass. Soon, she thought, soon she would stand beneath them in open air, no barriers between her and the sky. Soon she would be free. The storm broke 3 days later. Thomas came home from the mill with his face set in stone, his usual control barely masking the fury beneath. He called Sarah into the parlor, where Margaret already sat, her hands twisted in her apron. Catherine stood by the window, her expression victorious. Emily had been summoned from her own home and stood near the door, uncertain. "I've had a delegation from the church," Thomas said without preamble. The preacher, 3 elders, and half a dozen concerned citizens. They came to my place of business, Sarah, to my mill, where I conduct the affairs that keep this family fed and housed. Sarah stood very straight, though her heart hammered against her ribs. What did they want? They wanted to express their concern about your situation, about this inappropriate courtship with a stranger. They strongly suggested that I put a stop to it immediately, for the good of the community and the family's reputation. What did you tell them? Sarah's voice came out steadier than she felt. Thomas's jaw worked. I told them to mind their own affairs. I told them that my daughter's happiness was my concern, not theirs. I told them that Colton Reed was a decent man and that I saw no reason to interfere. Relief flooded through Sarah, but it was short-lived. And then, Thomas continued, his voice hardening, I came home to find that every piece of business I've had scheduled for the next month has been canceled. The church has suggested that perhaps their members should take their custom elsewhere. The banker has indicated that my credit may be reviewed. In one afternoon, Sarah, your courtship has cost this family dearly. The silence that followed was crushing. Sarah felt the weight of it pressing down on her shoulders, threatening to drive her to her knees. This was what she had feared, not just her own suffering, but causing suffering to others. "I'll end it," she whispered. "I'll tell Mr. Reed." "No." The word came from Margaret, surprising everyone. She rose from her chair, her usual timidity replaced by something harder. "No, Sarah. You will not sacrifice yourself for their prejudice. Asterisk. Mother, I have been silent for too long. I have watched you suffer for 22 years because I was too weak to stand up to your father, too frightened to challenge the town, too concerned with propriety to defend my own child. But I will not be silent anymore." Margaret's voice shook, but she kept speaking. "Thomas, we have money saved. We can weather a few months of lost business. And if we cannot, if we lose everything, then so be it. But I will not let them do to Sarah what was done to me." Sarah stared at her mother, seeing something she had never seen before: strength, resolve, and beneath it, a deep well of regret. Thomas looked at his wife with surprise and something that might have been respect. "What do you mean? What was done to you?" Margaret drew a shaking breath. "Before I married you, there was another man, David Harrison, a merchant's son, kind and gentle, who wanted to marry me. But my father forbade it because David's mother was Catholic. A different faith, and that was enough to make him unacceptable. I was told to end the courtship, to marry you instead because you were the safer choice. the respectable choice. Her voice broke, but she continued. I have spent 30 years wondering what my life might have been if I had been brave enough to choose love over approval. I will not watch my daughter make the same mistake. I will not be complicit in her unhappiness anymore. Catherine made a disgusted sound. So, we're all supposed to suffer because Sarah wants to marry some drifter cowboy. Is that it? He's not a drifter, Emily said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. I asked around. Colton Reed owns 200 acres in Montana, free and clear. He runs cattle, pays his debts, and is well respected by everyone who knows him. He's widowed, not divorced. He's never been arrested or caused trouble. He's exactly the kind of man any father would be proud to have court his daughter. She looked at Sarah with something like apology. I should have said so sooner. Thomas sank into his chair, suddenly looking old. The town will make our lives difficult. Let them, Margaret said. We've made Sarah's life difficult for 22 years. Perhaps it's time we experienced a little of what we've put her through. Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes. Mother, I don't want to hurt you. You're not hurting us, child. We hurt ourselves by caring more about other people's opinions than about your heart. I'm sorry, Sarah. I am so deeply sorry for every year I stayed silent. Every time I let your father hide you away. Every moment I chose comfort over courage. Margaret crossed to her daughter and took her hands. Marry your cowboy. Build the life you deserve. And if this town can't see your worth, then shame on them. The moment stretched, fragile and precious. Then Thomas cleared his throat. Reed better treat you right. If he doesn't, he'll answer to me. It was as close to a blessing as Sarah was likely to get. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Catherine stormed from the room, her footsteps loud on the stairs. Emily lingered, offering Sarah a tentative smile before leaving. Thomas returned to his newspaper, his way of processing emotion. But Margaret stayed, holding Sarah's hands. And for the first time in memory, Sarah felt truly seen by her mother. When Colton arrived that evening, Sarah met him at the door with the finished handkerchief wrapped in brown paper. She told him about the confrontation, about the town's pressure, about her mother's unexpected support. Are you certain? He asked. Because I can leave. I can take my business elsewhere. Let things settle. You don't have to do this for me. I'm not doing it for you, Sarah said. I'm doing it for myself. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing what I want instead of accepting what I'm given. That's worth any cost. She handed him the package. This is for you. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing the embroidered handkerchief. The mountain landscape she had created was intricate and beautiful, every stitch perfect, every detail considered. In the corner, she had embroidered their initials intertwined. Sarah, he breathed. This is extraordinary. It's Montana as I imagine it. Our home, if you'll still have me. If I'll still have you? He looked up from the handkerchief, his eyes fierce. Sarah McKenna, I would cross 100 towns like this one, face 1,000 delegations, endure any hardship, just for the privilege of calling you my wife. Don't doubt that. He folded the handkerchief carefully and placed it in his inside pocket, over his heart. I'll carry this with me always. And when people ask about it, I'll tell them it was made by the most talented, courageous woman I've ever known. They talked late into the evening, making plans. Colton had found land a section of good grazing country 5 miles outside of town, with a creek running through it and views of the mountains in the distance. He had already begun building a cabin, working alongside 2 hired men from his crew. It would be simple at first, just 4 rooms, but solid and weatherproof. They could expand later, as needs and means allowed. I want you to see it, he said. Before we marry, I want you to see what you're choosing. If it's not what you hope for, we can make changes. Sarah smiled. Colton, I've lived in a beautiful house that was a prison. I'd rather have a simple cabin that's a home. The wedding was set for 2 weeks hence, They would marry at the courthouse, a civil ceremony with Mrs. Dawson and one of Colton's ranch hands as witnesses. The church had made it clear that no religious ceremony would be performed for such an ill-advised union. Sarah found she did not care. The ceremony mattered less than the commitment. Thomas made his position clear the next morning. If you marry Reed, you're no longer my daughter. No inheritance, no family name, no place at this table. You'll be choosing him over us, and that choice is final. I understand, Sarah said quietly. She had expected this, had steeled herself for it. But understanding something and feeling it were different things. The pain was sharp and real. Margaret, however, had other ideas. That afternoon, while Thomas was at the mill, she called Sarah into her bedroom. From the back of her wardrobe, she withdrew a small wooden box. "These were my mother's," Margaret said, opening the box to reveal a pair of pearl earrings. The only valuable thing she owned, passed down from her mother before her. "They're yours now. Mother, I can't. You can and you will." Margaret pressed the box into Sarah's hands. "Your father can forbid what he wants, but these are mine to give. They're not much, but there's something. Something from your family, to remember that you were loved, even if we didn't always show it well." Sarah held the box, feeling the weight of generations in her hands. "Thank you. I wish I could give you more. I wish I could go back and do everything differently." Margaret's eyes were wet. "But I can give you this and my blessing and my hope that you'll be happier than I was." They embraced, and Sarah felt something shift between them. Not quite forgiveness, that would take time, but the beginning of understanding. Margaret had made her choices based on fear, and those choices had cost both of them dearly. But she was trying now to make different choices. That had to count for something. The town's reaction intensified as the wedding date approached. Women crossed the street to avoid speaking to Margaret at the mercantile. Thomas lost 3 more accounts. Catherine refused to come home, staying with Emily instead, declaring she wanted nothing to do with the family disgrace. The preacher delivered a sermon on the importance of maintaining proper social standards and the dangers of defying community wisdom. But there were small kindnesses too. Mrs. Dawson arranged for a simple wedding dress, cream-colored calico with lace at the collar. 2 of the ranch wives who had known Colton in Montana sent a letter of congratulations. The blacksmith, a gruff man who rarely spoke to anyone, stopped Colton on the street to tell him he thought Sarah was a lucky woman. "Not lucky," Colton corrected. "Strong. She's the strongest person I've ever met." The blacksmith had nodded, understanding in his weathered face. "Same thing sometimes?" Sarah used her final days in her family home to prepare. She packed her few possessions, clothes, books, her sewing supplies. She worked on a quilt late into the nights, piecing together scraps of fabric into a pattern of stars. It would be their wedding gift to themselves, a blanket for their new bed in their new home. Emily came to visit, bringing her baby daughter. "I wanted you to meet her properly," she said, "before you go. Her name is Margaret Ann, but we call her Maggie." Sarah held the infant carefully, marveling at the tiny perfection of her. "She's beautiful. She looks like you did as a baby," Mother says. "Pale hair, light eyes." Emily's voice was tentative. "I used to be afraid of that, afraid she might be like you. But now I think if she grows up to be half as brave as her aunt, she'd be extraordinary." It was an apology and a benediction, and Sarah accepted it as both. "Will you write to me? Wherever we are." "Yes, I promise." Emily squeezed her hand. "I'm sorry I wasn't a better sister. I'm sorry I let fear make me cruel." "We all did what we thought we had to do," Sarah said. "But we can choose differently now." The night before the wedding, Sarah stood at her window one last time, looking out at the town that had been her whole world. She felt no particular sadness about leaving it. It had never been home, really, just a place where she existed. Home would be wherever Colton was. Wherever she could be fully herself without apology or shame. She touched the pressed wildflower she kept in her pocket, the purple lupine Colton had brought her weeks ago. Tomorrow, she would start a new life. Tomorrow, she would walk out of this house not as Sarah McKenna, the albino girl, the family embarrassment, but as Sarah Reed, wife and partner and woman who had chosen her own path. The fear was still there. She would be lying if she said otherwise. But it was smaller now, overwhelmed by hope and possibility and the steady certainty of Colton's love. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tonight, she allowed herself to feel it all. The grief and joy, the fear and anticipation, the ending and the beginning. She was leaving behind one life and stepping into another, and there was no way to do that without feeling the weight of both. But she was ready. For the first time in her life, she was choosing instead of accepting. And that made all the difference. The courthouse ceremony was brief and quiet. Judge Morrison, a practical man who cared more about law than social opinion, performed the service with efficiency and respect. Mrs. Dawson stood as witness, her eyes bright with tears of joy. Jack Henderson, one of Colton's ranch hands, served as the other witness, his weathered face solemn with the importance of the occasion. Sarah wore the cream calico dress and her grandmother's pearl earrings. She carried no bouquet. There had been no time or money for such things, but Colton had tucked a sprig of sage into her hair that morning. The silvery green leaves, aromatic and beautiful in their simplicity, when the judge pronounced them man and wife. Colton kissed her carefully, tenderly, as if she were something precious that might break. But Sarah had never felt less breakable. Sarah had never felt less breakable. She felt strong, transformed, ready for whatever came next. They emerged from the courthouse to find a small crowd gathered. Sarah tensed, expecting hostility, but the faces were not all unfriendly. Mrs. Dawson's husband stood there, his hat in his hands. The blacksmith had come. 3 ranch families who knew Colton from Montana. And standing at the back with an expression of mingled pain and pride, Thomas McKenna. He did not speak, did not step forward to embrace his daughter or shake his new son-in-law's hand. But he had come, and that meant something. Margaret stood beside him, openly weeping, her hand pressed to her mouth. Emily was there too, with baby Maggie in her arms, smiling through her own tears. Catherine was notably absent. She had made her position clear and would not bend. Sarah felt the loss of her younger sister, but she could not change what Catherine refused to see. Colton helped Sarah into the wagon he had borrowed for the day. Their few possessions were already loaded: Sarah's trunk, Colton's bedroll, and supplies. The quilt Sarah had finished the night before. Everything they owned fit easily into the wagon bed. It was not much to start a life with, but it was theirs. As they drove out of town, Sarah looked back once. Her father still stood there, a statue of conflicting emotions. Margaret waved, her handkerchief a small white flag of blessing. Sarah raised her hand in return, a goodbye that felt both final and incomplete. Then she turned forward, toward the road ahead, toward the land Colton had prepared for them, toward her future. The ride took less than an hour. The land Colton had purchased lay in a valley between 2 ridges, protected from the worst of the winter winds, but open to the southern sun. A creek ran through the property, lined with cottonwoods and willows. The grass was good, thick and green even in late summer. Sarah could see why he had chosen it. The cabin sat on a slight rise, positioned to catch the morning light. It was small, as he had worn 4 rooms arranged in a simple square. But the logs were straight and true. The roof was solid, and smoke rose from the chimney, indicating that someone had started a fire in preparation for their arrival. "Jack's been keeping the place warm," Colton explained. "He'll bunk with the other hands in the old line shack for now. Later, we'll build a proper bunkhouse." He lifted Sarah down from the wagon, and for a moment, they stood together looking at their home. It was not grand. It was not even particularly pretty by conventional standards. But it was theirs, built by Colton's hands, waiting to be filled with their life together. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reed," Colton said softly. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, joyful tears. "Oh," she repeated, tasting the word. It felt right. He carried her over the threshold, a traditional gesture that made her laugh. The interior was simple, but carefully thought out. A main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a new iron stove, a bedroom with a real bed frame that Colton had clearly spent hours building, and a small room that could serve as a study or, someday, a nursery. "The furniture is rough," he apologized. "I'm better with cattle than carpentry, but it's functional, and we can improve it over time." "It's perfect," Sarah said honestly. She ran her hand over the table he had built, feeling the smooth wood beneath her palm. Everything here spoke of care and effort, of a man building a home for the woman he loved. The first night in their cabin was everything Sarah had dreamed, and nothing she had expected. Colton was patient, gentle, taking his time to help her overcome her nervousness and inexperience. There was tenderness and passion, both, and afterward, lying in his arms in their bed under her star quilt, Sarah felt a completeness she had never known existed. "Are you happy?" he asked, his voice rumbling in his chest beneath her ear. "More than I knew how to be," she answered honestly. The next morning, Sarah woke to sunlight streaming through the window, not a stolen glimpse through curtains, but full, glorious morning light that filled the room. She rose and dressed in the simple work clothes Colton had bought for her split skirt for riding, cotton blouse, sturdy boots. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found him cooking breakfast, bacon and eggs and biscuits that were only slightly burned. "I'm not much of a cook," he admitted. "That's something we'll both have to work on." "I can cook," Sarah assured him. "My mother taught me that much, at least." After breakfast, he took her on a tour of the property. They walked the creek line, examined the natural grazing areas, checked a small horse corral he had built. He showed her where he planned to expand the cattle operation, where they might put in a garden, where the land rose enough to provide a view of the surrounding country. "I want this to be our place," he said. "Not mine with you living here. Ours. Your opinions matter. Your ideas matter. If you see ways to improve things, I want to hear them." It was a radical notion for Sarah, who had spent her life having no say in anything. "I don't know much about ranching." "You'll learn. And you know things I don't. You're better educated than I am, better with figures and planning. We'll each bring what we're good at." Over the following days, they fell into a rhythm. Sarah took over the cooking and indoor work, transforming the bare cabin into something more homelike. She made curtains from spare fabric, arranged their few possessions to maximum effect, started a small herb garden near the kitchen door. Colton worked the land, teaching Sarah about cattle and horses and the endless tasks that came with ranching. He taught her to ride, something she had never been allowed to do. The first few attempts were awkward, but Sarah was determined. By the end of the first week, she could stay in the saddle at a walk. By the end of the second, she could trot without falling. The freedom of riding, of moving across open land with nothing between her and the sky, was intoxicating. "You're a natural," Colton said, watching her guide her mare through a turn. "I'm clumsy and inexperienced," Sarah corrected, but she was smiling. "You're brave. That counts for more." The ranch hands Jack and two younger men named Pete and Tom treated Sarah with careful respect. They had been warned by Colton about her appearance, and to their credit, they adjusted quickly. Within days, they were treating her like any other ranch wife, tipping their hats when they saw her, complimenting her cooking, asking her opinion on small matters around the homestead. Sarah blossomed under this ordinary respect. She grew stronger physically, her body adjusting to the work and outdoor life. Her skin, always sensitive to sun, required care and wide-brimmed hats, but she learned to manage. More importantly, she grew stronger in spirit. The tentative, frightened woman who had left Sage Creek was transforming into someone more confident, more assured of her place in the world. Colton watched these changes with quiet satisfaction. In the evenings, they would sit on their small porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, and he would tell her about his day while she told him about hers. They were building a life together, piece by piece, day by day. Margaret's pearl earrings held a place of honor on Sarah's dresser. She wore them on Sundays, even though there was no church to attend, no social calls to make. They were a reminder that she came from somewhere, that she had a history, even if she was building a different future. One evening, Colton presented her with a brand he had designed, a stylized S and R intertwined for their shared initials. "I wanted you to help choose it," he said. "This ranch is as much yours as mine." Sarah traced the design with her finger, moved by the symbolism. Her initial, equal with his, marking their shared enterprise. "It's beautiful. I'll get it made into an iron. When we buy more cattle, we'll brand them together." It was a small thing perhaps, but it represented something profound. Sarah was not just Colton's wife, living in his house, eating his food, dependent on his charity. She was his partner, her name literally branded alongside his on everything they built. 3 weeks into their marriage, Margaret came to visit. She drove out alone in the family buggy, her courage evident in the set of her shoulders. Sarah saw her coming from the window and felt her heart clench with complicated emotions. They sat in the cabin's main room, tea cooling in their cups, uncertain how to begin. Finally, Margaret spoke. "Your father hasn't changed his position. He still maintains that you're no longer his daughter, but he's not forbidding me from seeing you. That's something," Sarah said carefully. "It's not enough. Nothing I can do now will be enough to make up for the years I stayed silent." Margaret's hands twisted in her lap. "But I wanted to try, Sarah. I want to know you, to be part of your life, if you'll allow it." "I'd like that," Sarah said softly. "I'm still angry, Mother. I won't pretend I'm not. But I understand now, a little better, why you made the choices you did. Fear is powerful. It is. And I let it rule me for too long." Margaret looked around the simple cabin, taking in the curtains Sarah had made, the carefully tended space, the evidence of a life being built. "You look happy." "I am. Happier than I ever thought I could be." "Then I'm glad. Even if it cost us everything else, I'm glad you found this." They talked for an hour, carefully rebuilding a relationship that had always been strained. When Margaret left, she pressed a small purse into Sarah's hand. "For my own savings. Your father doesn't know. Use it however you need." Sarah tried to refuse, but Margaret insisted. "Let me do this small thing. Let me help, even if it's late and inadequate." After she left, Sarah counted the money $50, a significant sum. She and Colton could use it for supplies, for improvements to the ranch. But more valuable than the money was the gesture itself. Her mother was trying, in her way, to make amends. That night, Sarah told Colton about the visit. "Do you think people can change? Really change, not just make promises they can't keep?" "I think people can grow," he said thoughtfully. "I think they can recognize their mistakes and try to do better. That's all any of us can do." She was complicit in my suffering for 22 years. She was. And nothing changes that. But she's trying now. Whether that's enough is for you to decide. Sarah leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. "I want to forgive her, eventually, but I'm not ready yet." "And don't? Take your time. Forgiveness isn't something you owe anyone, Sarah. It's something you give when you're ready, if you're ever ready." The wisdom in his words settled something in her chest. She did not have to rush to forgive, did not have to pretend wounds were healed before they had even begun to close. She could take her time, feel what she felt, and make her choices from a place of strength rather than obligation. Their first month together passed in this way, building, learning, growing. The ranch was taking shape. So was their marriage, and Sarah, for the first time in her life, was becoming the person she was meant to be. The drive home that night was quiet. Both of them exhausted but satisfied. The stars overhead were brilliant, and the air smelled of approaching winter and wood smoke and possibility. "You were magnificent tonight," Colton said, his voice warm in the darkness. "I was terrified," Sarah admitted. "But I did it anyway. That's what courage is. Not the absence of fear, but moving forward despite it." Back at the cabin, they sat together on their porch, despite the cold, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars. Sarah felt something settling inside her, not quite peace, but something close to it. She had faced the town and survived. More than survived, she had claimed her place among them, not asking for permission, but simply taking what was rightfully hers. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Choosing me, facing all this difficulty?" Colton pulled her closer. "Not once. Not for a single moment. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Sarah Reed. Every challenge, every hardship, every whisper and stare, it's all worth it to have you by my side." She believed him. That was the miracle of it. After a lifetime of being told she was worthless, she had found someone who made her believe in her own value. And in believing it, she was becoming it. Strong, capable, worthy. A week after the dance, Margaret came again, this time with news. "Your father is ill," she said without preamble. "Nothing life-threatening, just a bad cold that settled in his chest. But he's asking for you." Sarah felt her heart clench. "He disowned me. I know. And that was wrong. But he's still your father, Sarah, and I think he's beginning to understand what he's lost." Sarah looked to Colton, seeking his guidance without words. He squeezed her hand. "I'll support whatever you decide. But if you want to see him, I think you should. Not for his sake, for yours." The next day, Sarah rode into town alone. It felt strange to enter her childhood home again, seeing the familiar rooms from the perspective of a visitor rather than a resident. The house was quieter than she remembered, emptier somehow. Catherine was still staying with Emily, leaving just her parents in the too large space. Thomas was in bed, propped up on pillows, his face haggard from illness and perhaps from other things. He looked older than Sarah remembered, diminished somehow. When she entered the room, his eyes widened, and she saw tears gathering there. Sarah. Father. She stood in the doorway, uncertain. "Mother said you were ill." "I've been worse. I'll survive." He coughed, a deep rattling sound. When he caught his breath, he looked at her directly. "You look well. Happy." "I am. I was wrong." The words came out rough, forced. "About many things. But most of all, I was wrong about you." Sarah felt her throat tighten but said nothing, letting him continue. "I told myself I was protecting you, keeping you safe. But I was protecting myself. My pride, my reputation, my comfort. And I sacrificed you to do it." His voice broke. "I'm sorry, Sarah. It's inadequate, I know. Years too late. But I'm sorry." Sarah felt her own tears coming, hot and cleansing. She crossed to the bed, sat carefully on its edge. "I'm not ready to forgive you. Not yet. The wounds are too deep, and they're still healing. But I hear you. I hear your apology, and I acknowledge it. That's all I can give you right now. It's more than I deserve." Thomas reached out a trembling hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Sarah took it. His grip was weak but desperate. "Your husband, he's a good man, the best man I've ever known." "Then I'm grateful. Grateful that you found someone who sees your worth, since I was too blind to see it myself." He coughed again, exhausted by emotion and illness. "If you'll allow it, I'd like to try to know you. Not as the daughter I hid away, but as the woman you've become. Maybe, Sarah said carefully. In time, but it will take time, Father. You can't expect to undo 22 years of damage in a single conversation. I know. I'll take whatever you can give. She stayed for an hour, sitting beside his bed, not saying much but being present. It was not reconciliation, not yet, but it was a beginning. When she left, Margaret walked her to the door. Thank you for coming, her mother said. He's been carrying this guilt like a stone around his neck. Your willingness to even listen means more than you know. I didn't do it for him, Sarah said honestly. I did it for myself. I needed to hear him acknowledge what he did. I needed to know he understood. And now? Now I go home to my husband and my life. The life I chose. The life that makes me happy. And maybe, eventually, there will be room in that life for a relationship with my parents. But it will be on my terms, in my time. Margaret embraced her, fierce and quick. You've grown so strong. I wish I could take credit for it, but I can't. This is all you, Sarah. You survived us and became extraordinary anyway. Riding home through the autumn afternoon, Sarah felt lighter somehow. Not because anything was solved. The pain of her childhood remained, and forgiveness was still far off. But she had spoken her truth, had refused to minimize her hurt or rush to make her father feel better. She had set boundaries, claimed her right to heal at her own pace, and that felt like power. Fall came to the Wyoming territory with spectacular color. The cottonwoods along the creek turned golden. The aspens on the hillsides blazed orange and red. Sarah had never seen autumn this way, not hidden behind windows, but immersed in it, walking through fallen leaves. Feeling the crisp air on her face, she and Colton worked side by side through the harvest season. They cut hay for winter feed, repaired fences, prepared the cabin for cold weather. Sarah learned to handle an axe, to stack wood, to read the sky for signs of coming weather. Her hands, once soft from indoor work, developed calluses. Her body grew lean and strong. The ranch was prospering in small ways. Colton had purchased 20 head of cattle, young stock that would mature over the winter. They had 4 horses, now Colton's gelding, Sarah's Maury, and 2 work horses for hauling. The chickens Sarah had bought produced eggs daily. It was not wealth, but it was security, and it was theirs. Occasionally, they rode into Sage Creek for supplies. These trips were uncomfortable, but necessary. Most people still avoided direct contact with Sarah, though the open hostility had cooled to uncomfortable tolerance. Mrs. Dawson remained steadfastly supportive, and a few others had begun nodding greetings. It was not acceptance, exactly, but it was no longer outright rejection. Thomas never acknowledged Sarah on these trips. He would see her. She knew his eyes would track her movements across the store or down the street, but he never spoke, never approached. The estrangement was complete and painful in ways Sarah had not fully anticipated. She had thought leaving would free her from his disapproval. Instead, it just changed the shape of the wound. But she had Colton, and she had her new life, and most days that was enough. One afternoon in October, they were working together to repair a section of fence when a rider appeared on the horizon. As he drew closer, Sarah recognized him, a young man from town named Daniel Pierce, the postmaster's son. Mr. Reed? Mrs. Reed? Daniel pulled his horse to a stop, looking nervous. I hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, Colton said, setting down his tools. What brings you out? Well, sir, it's about the dance. The harvest dance the town holds every year. Daniel twisted his hat in his hands. There's been some discussion about whether to invite you folks. Some people are against it, but others think it would be the Christian thing to do. I drew the short straw, so here I am. Sarah felt her stomach clench. A public event, the whole town gathered, all eyes on her. That's kind, she managed, but we wouldn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. That's just it, ma'am. My mother, she's one of the church ladies. She said it's time folks stopped acting like you're some kind of curse. She said you've been married near about 6 weeks now, and the world hasn't ended, and maybe people ought to reconsider their positions. He pulled an envelope from his pocket. This is a formal invitation. You don't have to come if you don't want to, but you're welcome if you do. After Daniel left, Sarah and Colton stood in the autumn sunshine, the invitation between them. Do you want to go? Colton asked carefully. I don't know. Part of me wants to hide forever, to never face their judgment again. But another part of me, she paused, trying to articulate the feeling. Another part wants to walk in there with my head high and show them I'm not ashamed, that I'm happy, that they don't get to win. Then we'll go. Colton's voice was firm. Not because we owe them anything, but because you deserve to stand in that room like anyone else. You deserve to dance and laugh and be seen as the remarkable woman you are. The invitation sat on their mantel for 3 days while Sarah wrestled with her decision. She imagined walking into that barn, feeling all eyes turn to her. She imagined the whispers, the stares, the possible hostility, but she also imagined dancing with Colton, claiming her place in the community, refusing to be invisible anymore. Finally, she made up her mind. We're going, she told Colton over breakfast on the 4th day. I'm terrified, but we're going. He smiled, pride clear in his eyes. That's my girl. Sarah spent the next week preparing. She made herself a new dress, nothing fancy, just sturdy blue calico with a simple collar, but it fit well and made her feel confident. She practiced dancing with Colton in their cabin, laughing when she stepped on his toes, glowing when he told her she was graceful. Margaret visited again, bringing news from town. Emily is planning to attend with her husband. She wanted you to know that she stand with you if anyone causes trouble. And father? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. He's not going. Says his presence would just make things more difficult for everyone. Margaret's expression was pained. He's a stubborn man, Sarah, but I think, in his own way, he's protecting you by staying away. Yes, it's not what you deserve, but it's what he can give right now. The night of the dance arrived cold and clear, stars brilliant in the autumn sky. Sarah dressed carefully, pinned her hair up with the silver combs Colton had surprised her with the week before, wore her grandmother's pearl earrings. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Not because of her appearance, that was unchanged, still pale and striking, but because of the expression in her eyes. Confidence, determination, strength. You look beautiful, Colton said from the doorway. He wore his best clothes, a dark suit he had bought for the occasion, his hair neatly trimmed, his boots polished. Not just beautiful, powerful. They rode into town as the sun was setting, the barn already glowing with lantern light. Sarah could hear music drifting on the evening air, could see wagons and horses gathered outside. Her heart hammered, but she kept her spine straight, her head high. Colton helped her down from the wagon, offered his arm. Ready? No, but I'm doing it anyway. They walked toward the barn together, and with each step, Sarah felt herself transforming. Not into someone different, but more fully into herself. She was not the hidden daughter anymore. She was not the town's shame, their cautionary tale, their reason to feel superior. She was Sarah Reed, wife and rancher, a woman who had chosen courage over fear and was reaping the rewards. The moment they entered the barn, conversation stopped. Every head turned, every eye fixed on them. Sarah felt the weight of those stares, felt the old instinct to shrink, to hide, to apologize for existing. But she did not hide. She stood straight, met their gazes calmly, and waited till the silence stretched, uncomfortable and charged. Then, from across the room, Mrs. Dawson began to clap. Just her, at first, slow and deliberate. Then her husband joined in. Then Emily, standing near the refreshment table with her husband. Then, surprisingly, Daniel Pierce's mother. Then others, hesitantly at first, then more surely. Not everyone clapped. Some turned away, made their disapproval clear. But enough people clapped that the moment shifted from hostile to cautiously welcoming. Mrs. Dawson crossed the room, embraced Sarah warmly. "About time you came home to us," she said loudly enough for others to hear. "Welcome, my dear. Welcome to both of you." Colton led Sarah to the dance floor as the fiddle player struck up a waltz. Other couples parted to make room, watching them. Colton's hand was steady at her waist, his eyes locked on hers, blocking out everyone else. "Just look at me," he murmured. "Forget them. Just us." They danced, and Sarah felt something shift. The room did not disappear. She was still aware of the watching eyes, the whispered comments. But they mattered less. What mattered was Colton's hand in hers, the music carrying them across the floor, the joy of moving together. Other couples gradually resumed dancing. The tension eased by degrees. And then, during the second dance, something remarkable happened. A young girl, no more than 7, with curious eyes and a gap-toothed smile, approached Sarah during a break in the music. "Excuse me, ma'am." The child's voice was high and clear. "Your hair is so pretty. How do you make it white like that?" The adults nearby froze, horrified that a child would be so direct. But Sarah knelt down to the girl's level, smiling. "I was born with it this way. It's called albinism. It means my hair and skin don't have much color. It's like snow," the girl said wonderingly. "Like a snow princess." "I suppose it is," Sarah agreed, charmed. "Lily." The girl's mother hurried over, face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Reed. She doesn't understand." "She understands perfectly," Sarah said gently, rising. "She sees something beautiful and says so. That's honesty, not rudeness." "Thank you, Lily. You've given me a lovely gift tonight." The mother blinked, surprised, then managed a tentative smile. "That's very gracious of you. It's just truth." Sarah touched the girl's hair briefly. "You have beautiful hair, too. Like copper pennies." Asterisk after that exchange, something shifted in the room. It was subtle, but real. A few more people approached to make conversation. Emily and her husband joined them, and Emily's warm greeting helped ease others' discomfort. The preacher's wife, who had been so opposed to the marriage, nodded civilly in passing. One of the ranchers asked Colton about his cattle operation and included Sarah, naturally, in the conversation. Not everyone warmed to them. A knot of older women kept their distance. Faces set in disapproval. A group of young men made comments just loud enough to hear, though Colton's hard stare in their direction quieted them quickly. But the overall tone had changed from hostile to mixed, and that was progress. As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself almost enjoying it. She danced with Colton repeatedly, feeling free and light in his arms. She spoke with Mrs. Dawson about starting a small business selling her embroidery work. She held Emily's baby and felt, for the first time, like part of a family beyond just her and Colton. The drive home that night was quiet, both of them exhausted but satisfied. The stars overhead were brilliant, and the air smelled of approaching winter and wood smoke and possibility. Winter arrived early that year, sweeping down from the mountains with fierce winds and heavy snow. Sarah and Colton had prepared well. The cabin was tight and warm, the animals sheltered, supplies stocked. They settled into the slower rhythm of winter work, spending long evenings by the fire, talking and reading and simply being together. In late November, a letter arrived from Emily. Margaret had taken a sudden turn for the worse. What had seemed like a simple cold had developed into pneumonia. The doctor was not optimistic. Emily wrote that their mother was asking for Sarah. "I have to go," Sarah told Colton, her voice steady despite the fear clutching her heart. "I'll take you," he said immediately. But Sarah shook her head. "Stay here. The ranch needs tending, and I need to do this alone. This is my family. my complicated history. I need to face it without hiding behind you." He understood, though it clearly pained him to let her go. "Promise me you'll send word if you need me. If things get difficult, if Thomas gives you trouble, anything." "I promise." The ride to town through the snow was cold and treacherous, but Sarah's mar was steady. When she arrived at the McKenna house, Emily met her at the door, her face drawn with exhaustion and grief. "She's upstairs. Father is with her. He hasn't left her side in 2 days." Sarah climbed the familiar stairs to her parents' bedroom. The room was dim, curtains drawn, the air heavy with the smell of sickness and camphor. Margaret lay in the bed, her breathing labored and shallow. Thomas sat beside her, holding her hand, looking more lost than Sarah had ever seen him. He looked up when Sarah entered, his eyes red-rimmed. "She's been asking for you." Sarah approached the bed, her heart breaking at the sight of her mother's frailty. Margaret's eyes fluttered open, focused on Sarah's face, and a smile touched her pale lips. "Sarah, you came." "Of course I came." Sarah took her mother's other hand, felt how cold it was despite the warmth of the room. "I'm here, Mother. I'm glad." Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. "I have things to tell you. Things you need to know." Over the next 3 days, Sarah stayed at her mother's bedside, tending to her needs, helping with the difficult work of dying. Thomas remained there too, the two of them forming a tentative truce in the face of shared grief. Emily came and went, bringing food and fresh water, taking turns sitting vigil. Even Catherine returned, her hostility muted by the reality of their mother's condition. On the second night, when Margaret was having a clearer moment, she asked Thomas to leave them alone. He hesitated, then nodded and left the room. Margaret gestured for Sarah to come closer. "There's a box," she whispered, "in the attic, hidden behind the old trunk. I need you to find it. Mother, you should rest, please. Before I die, I need you to find it. And I need you to forgive him, Sarah. He's not the monster you think he is." Sarah wanted to argue, but her mother's eyes were pleading. "All right, I'll look for it." The next morning, while Thomas dozed in his chair and Emily watched over their mother, Sarah climbed to the attic. It was a cramped space, filled with the accumulated debris of family life-old furniture, trunks of clothes, forgotten toys. She found the trunk her mother had mentioned, and behind it, a small wooden box tied with string. She brought it down to an empty bedroom, her hands trembling as she opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, yellowed with age, and photographs, old daguerreotypes that must have been expensive to commission. Sarah lifted one carefully and felt her world tilt. The photograph showed a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, standing stiffly as was customary for long exposures. She was beautiful in an ethereal way, with pale skin and white hair and light eyes. She looked exactly like Sarah. With shaking hands, Sarah opened one of the letters. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, addressed to "My dearest son, Thomas." She began to read. The letters told a story Sarah had never known. Thomas's mother, Sarah's grandmother, had been albino. Her name was Elizabeth, and she had lived through hell. Born in 1815, she had been treated like a freak, kept locked away by her family, shown to visitors as a curiosity. She had been displayed at fairs, gawked at by crowds, called a devil's child and worse. When she was 20, she had escaped and made her way west, trying to start over. She had met and married Sarah's grandfather, a kind man who had loved her despite her appearance. They had been happy for a time, had a son, Thomas, but the happiness had not lasted. The townspeople had never accepted Elizabeth. They had whispered and stared and made life difficult. When Thomas was 10 years old, Elizabeth had taken her own life, unable to bear the isolation and judgment any longer. She had left letters for her son, trying to explain, trying to help him understand. Thomas had found his mother's body. He had been the one to cut her down from the barn rafter where she had hanged herself. Sarah sat frozen, the letters scattered around her, understanding dawning with terrible clarity. Her father had not been cruel out of hatred or shame. He had been terrified. Terrified that Sarah would suffer the same fate as his mother. Terrified that the world would break her the way it had broken. Elizabeth thought, so he had tried to protect her the only way he knew how, by hiding her, by keeping her away from the cruelty he knew awaited her. It was wrong, deeply wrong, but it had come from fear and love twisted together until they became indistinguishable. She gathered the letters and photographs and returned to her mother's room. Thomas was back, his head bowed, exhausted. Sarah laid the box on the bed where both her parents could see it. "You knew," she said to Thomas, her voice thick with emotion. He looked up, saw the box, and his face crumbled. "I couldn't tell you. I couldn't speak of it. Every time I looked at you, I saw my mother. I saw what the world did to her, and I was so afraid it would do the same to you. So you locked me away. You became the very people who drove your mother to despair." "I know." He was weeping now, broken. "I know, Sarah. I thought I was saving you. I thought if you never knew freedom, you wouldn't miss it. I thought if I kept you hidden, the world couldn't hurt you. But I was the one hurting you. I became the thing I feared most." Margaret reached for Sarah's hand weakly. "I wanted to tell you so many times, but I promised Thomas I wouldn't. He made me swear when we were first married that we would never speak of his mother, never acknowledge what happened. He buried it so deep he couldn't face it." Sarah looked at the photograph of her grandmother, this woman she had never known, who had suffered so terribly, whose tragedy had shaped Sarah's entire life. Elizabeth's eyes, even captured in that old photograph, held a deep sadness. But they also held something else, a spark of defiance, of dignity, despite everything. "She was strong," Sarah said softly. "Your mother, even in her darkest moment, she was strong enough to free herself from pain." "She was the strongest person I ever knew," Thomas said. "Until you. You have her strength, Sarah, but you also have something she didn't have, someone who sees your worth. That man you married, he's given you what my father couldn't give my mother. A place to stand, a person to stand with. I'm grateful for that, even if I can't forgive myself for what I put you through." Margaret's breathing had become more labored. The doctor, when he came that afternoon, told them quietly that it would be soon. The family gathered Thomas, Sarah, Emily, even Catherine. Setting aside their differences in the face of death's immediacy, that evening, as the sun set and snow fell softly outside, Margaret took her last breath. She went peacefully, with Thomas holding one hand and Sarah holding the other. Her last words were to Thomas, "Let her go. Let her be free." The funeral was held 3 days later. The town turned out in force, not for Sarah, but for Margaret, who had been well-liked despite her family's complications. Sarah stood between Colton, who had come as soon as he heard, and her father. The three of them united in grief. After the burial, after the mourners had left and the house had emptied, Sarah sat with her father in the quiet parlor. The box of letters lay between them. "I don't forgive you," Sarah said clearly. "Not yet, and maybe not ever for some of it. What you did was wrong, and understanding why doesn't erase the harm." Thomas nodded, accepting this. "But I understand now. I understand the fear that drove you, and I understand that you were trying, in your broken way, to love me." She touched the photograph of Elizabeth gently. "Your mother deserved better than what she got. And so did I, but I survived, Father. I survived, and I'm thriving. I'm living the life your mother never got to have." "I'm glad," Thomas said hoarsely. "I'm so glad, Sarah. You're stronger than both of us, stronger than my mother, stronger than me. You took the pain and the fear, and you transformed them into courage. That's extraordinary." Sarah pulled a small object from her pocket, the wooden horse Colton had carved for her. worn smooth from being carried every day. This represents freedom to me. Movement, choice, life lived openly. Your mother never got to experience that, but I have, and I will continue to. Not despite my appearance, but with it. Because I am who I am, and I'm learning to be proud of that. She stood to leave, but paused at the door. If you want to be part of my life going forward, you can be. But it will be on my terms. I will not hide myself to make you comfortable. I will not minimize my hurt to ease your guilt. If you can accept that, then we can build something new. Something honest. I can accept that, Thomas said. I want to accept that. Sarah nodded once, then left. Colton was waiting outside with the wagon, and she went to him gratefully, letting him enfold her in his arms. "How are you?" he asked, grieving, angry, relieved, confused. She looked up at him, but mostly ungrateful. "Grateful that I have you, that I have our life, that I chose freedom when I had the chance. Your love saved me from becoming another tragedy. It gave me the strength to write a different ending." "You saved yourself, Sarah. I was just lucky enough to be there to witness it." They rode home through the winter twilight, the box of letters and photographs secure in Sarah's lap. She would keep them, these remnants of her grandmother's pain, not as a burden, but as a reminder that she carried Elizabeth's strength in her bones, that she had broken the cycle of fear and shame, that she was living the life her grandmother had deserved but never received. It was a heavy gift, this knowledge, but Sarah was strong enough to carry it. She had proven that already, and she would continue to prove it every day of her life. The winter months following Margaret's death were a time of quiet reflection and gradual healing. Sarah returned to the ranch with a new understanding of her history, carrying both the burden and the strength of her grandmother's legacy. The knowledge that her father's cruelty had been born from fear rather than hatred did not excuse it, but it did help her make sense of it, and making sense of things was sometimes the first step toward letting them go. She shared everything with Colton, the letters, the photographs, the terrible story of Elizabeth's suicide. He listened without judgment, held her when she cried, and reminded her gently that she was writing her own story now, not reliving her grandmother's tragedy. "You're not her," he said one evening as they sat by the fire. "You have what she didn't have: someone who sees you, supports you, stands with you. You have a choice. She didn't. I know, but I carry her with me now. Her pain, but also her strength. I want to honor that. Then live fully. Live freely. Live loudly if you want to. That's the best way to honor someone who couldn't." As winter deepened, Thomas began making tentative efforts to connect. He sent a letter asking if he might visit in the spring when weather allowed. He sent a book of poetry he thought Sarah might enjoy. Small gestures, careful and uncertain, like a man learning a new language. Sarah responded cautiously, neither encouraging nor discouraging, simply acknowledging his efforts without committing to more than she was ready to give. Emily visited once, bringing Maggie and staying for several days. The sisters talked honestly for the first time in their lives, Emily confessing her own fears and failures, Sarah sharing her journey toward healing. They would never have the easy closeness that some sisters enjoyed. Too much pain lay between them, but they were building something real. Something honest. Catherine remained distant, her anger and rejection unchanged. Sarah made peace with that. Some people were not ready to change, and she could not force them. She could only control her own responses, her own choices. The ranch prospered through the winter. Colton's careful planning and Sarah's management of household resources meant they had plenty. The cattle weathered the cold well, the horses stayed healthy, and they lost only 2 chickens to a fox. In March, Colton purchased 10 more head of cattle and hired another ranch hand, expanding their operation. Sarah had begun selling her embroidery work through Mrs. Dawson's Mercantile. The pieces sold quickly, bringing in money that Sarah saved for improvements to the ranch and, secretly, for a future she was just beginning to imagine. She had missed her monthly courses twice now and suspected she might be pregnant, though she had not yet told Colton. She wanted to be certain. In early April, an envelope arrived that would change everything. It was addressed to both of them, formally printed, bearing the seal of the Sage Creek Community Council. Inside was an invitation, not a casual request, but an official invitation to the Spring Harvest Dance, the town's largest social event of the year. But this was more than a dance invitation. The letter, signed by the mayor and several prominent citizens, was an acknowledgement, an apology of sorts, and an invitation to take their place as full members of the community. We recognize that we have not always extended the Christian charity and basic human decency that we claim to value. The letter read, "We wish to make amends for past wrongs and to formally welcome you both as respected members of Sage Creek." Sarah read it 3 times, her emotions complicated. Part of her wanted to throw it in the fire, to reject them as they had rejected her. Part of her wanted to prove that she did not need their acceptance, that she had built a life beyond their narrow boundaries. But another part, a growing part, recognized that acceptance, even late, even imperfect, was still valuable. "What do you want to do?" Colton asked. "I don't know. It feels like they want me to forgive them, to act like everything is fine now. But it's not fine. The damage they did doesn't disappear just because they've decided to be decent. No, it doesn't. But maybe accepting their invitation isn't about forgiveness. Maybe it's about showing them and yourself that you've moved beyond needing their approval." Sarah considered this. "You think I should go. I think you should do whatever feels right to you. But I also think that walking into that dance hall, standing among them as an equal, might be powerful. Not for them, for you." She carried the invitation with her for days, touching it like a talisman, weighing her options. Finally, she made her decision. They would go. Not because the town deserved her presence, but because she deserved to claim her place among them without apology or shame. "But I'm going on my own terms," she told Colton. "I'm not hiding who I am. I'm not minimizing what they did. I'm going as Sarah Reed, rancher's wife, businesswoman, and woman who has earned her place through courage, not their conditional approval. That's my girl," Colton said with pride. Sarah began preparing for the dance with purpose. She made herself a new dress, this one more elaborate than anything she had worn before. Deep green fabric that brought out the violet tones in her eyes, with careful pleating and detailed embroidery at the collar and cuffs. She would not apologize for her appearance by wearing drab colors or simple cuts. She would dress beautifully, confidently, celebrating rather than hiding her difference. The week before the dance, Thomas visited. It was his first trip to the ranch, and Sarah saw him taking in the modest but well-maintained property, the evidence of hard work and careful planning. She served him coffee on the porch, the two of them sitting in careful formality. "I want to attend the dance," he said without preamble. "With you? As your father?" Sarah felt her throat tighten. "Why?" "Because I should have done it 22 years ago. I should have walked beside you through every church service, every town gathering, every social event. I should have stood between you and their judgment and made it clear that you were loved and valued. I didn't do that. I can't undo that failure. But I can start now, if you'll let me." It was the most vulnerable Sarah had ever seen him. The powerful, stern man of her childhood had been replaced by someone older, humbler, carrying the weight of his regrets. "I don't need you to stand between me and their judgment anymore," Sarah said carefully. "I've learned to stand on my own. But if you want to stand beside me, as my father, acknowledging me publicly for the first time in my life," her voice caught, "I would accept that." Thomas's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. Thank you. I don't deserve it, but thank you." Asterisk. They talked for another hour, carefully building bridges over chasms of pain. Thomas shared more about Elizabeth, about the guilt and fear that has shaped his entire life. Sarah shared her own experiences, helping him understand exactly what his actions had cost her. It was not comfortable, and there were moments of anger and grief on both sides. But it was honest, and honesty was the foundation they needed. When Thomas left, he handed Sarah a small object wrapped in cloth, the pocket watch that had been his father's, and his father's before that. "This is yours," he said. "Your grandmother should have passed it to you herself. She would have wanted you to have it." The watch was silver, tarnished with age, but still keeping perfect time. Inside the case was an inscription. "To Elizabeth, with all my love, may you always have time for joy." It had been a wedding gift from Sarah's grandfather to her grandmother, a symbol of his devotion despite the world's judgment. Sarah held it carefully, feeling the weight of generations in her palm. "Thank you, Father. I'll treasure it." The night before the dance, Sarah confirmed what she had suspected. She was pregnant, 2 months along, the doctor in the neighboring town estimated. She told Colton that evening, watching his face transform from surprise to wonder to pure joy. "A baby," he breathed. "We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Sarah asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. Happy doesn't cover it. Grateful, blessed, terrified. He pulled her close. A child who will know from the first breath that they're loved and wanted and valued, no matter what. A child who will never be hidden or ashamed. Asterisk. A child who will have your strength and your kindness, Sarah said softly. And your courage. Your intelligence. Your grace. He placed his hand gently on her still flat belly. This child is so lucky to have you as a mother. They sat together in the gathering darkness, making plans and dreaming dreams. They would need to expand the cabin, add another room. They would need more supplies, more money, more help around the ranch. But these were good problems, happy problems. The problems of building a life rather than merely surviving one. The next evening, as Sarah dressed for the dance, she caught her reflection in the mirror. The green dress fit perfectly, showing her figure to advantage. Her hair was styled simply but elegantly, held back with silver combs. The pearl earrings caught the lamplight. She looked beautiful, not despite her albinism, but inclusive of it. Her pale skin and white hair and unusual eyes, all part of a striking whole. You're stunning, Colton said from the doorway. He wore his best suit again, but this time he also wore something new, a string tie with a silver clasp that bore their ranch brand, the intertwined S and R. Ready? Ready, Sarah confirmed. She slipped Elizabeth's pocket watch into her reticule, a talisman of strength. Her grandmother would be with her tonight, and so would all the courage it had taken to get here. They drove into town as the sun was setting, turning the sky brilliant shades of orange and pink. The barn where the dance was held glowed with lantern light, and music already drifted on the evening air. Wagons and horses filled the yard. It seemed like the entire town had turned out. When they arrived, Thomas was waiting near the entrance, dressed in his formal clothes, his expression nervous but determined. Emily stood with him, holding Maggie. Several other townspeople had gathered, including Mrs. Dawson, the mayor, and the preacher's wife Dot. As Sarah stepped down from the wagon, something unexpected happened. The small crowd began to applaud. Not the scattered, uncertain applause of the last dance, but genuine, sustained clapping. The mayor stepped forward, hat in hand. Mrs. Reed, Mr. Reed, on behalf of Sage Creek, I want to formally welcome you. We have not always been our best selves where you're concerned, and we're hoping tonight can be a new beginning. Sarah felt Colton's hand at her back, steady and supportive. She looked at the faces around her, some genuinely welcoming, others still uncertain but trying. Not everyone had come around. She could see pockets of disapproval, people who stood back from the group, arms crossed. But enough had changed that the overall atmosphere was different. Thomas stepped forward, offered his arm. "May I escort my daughter inside?" It was what Sarah had waited for her entire life, her father acknowledging her publicly, proudly, without shame. She took his arm, feeling the symbolism of the moment. They walked toward the barn entrance together, Colton on her other side, Emily following with the baby. The barn fell quiet as they entered, all eyes turning to watch. But this time, the silence felt different, not hostile, but expectant. People were waiting to see what would happen, how to respond. Sarah walked forward with her head high, her father's arm linked with hers, her husband beside her, claiming her place. Then Mrs. Dawson began to clap again, starting a wave that spread through the room. Not everyone joined in. Sarah saw a cluster of older women in the corner who remained stony-faced, saw a group of young men who sneered, but most of the town was applauding, accepting her. Finally, belatedly, but genuinely accepting her. The preacher approached, his wife beside him. "Mrs. Reed, we owe you an apology. A profound one. We failed to show Christian charity when it mattered most. We're hoping you might forgive us." Sarah looked at him steadily. "I appreciate the apology, but forgiveness takes time. What matters now is how you treat others who are different, who don't fit your expectations. If you've truly changed, show it through your actions, not just your words." The preacher nodded, humbled. "That's fair. That's more than fair." Thomas cleared his throat, his voice carrying across the now quiet barn. "I want to say something to everyone." He looked at Sarah, asking permission with his eyes. She nodded, curious. "Most of you know that I have not always been a good father to Sarah. I kept her hidden, treated her as something to be ashamed of, denied her the life she deserved. I told myself I was protecting her, but I was protecting myself. My own fear, my own pride, my own comfort." His voice shook but did not break. "I was wrong. Profoundly, terribly wrong. And I owe my daughter more than an apology. I owe her the public acknowledgement she should have received from birth. Sarah McKenna Reed is my daughter. She is brave, talented, intelligent, and kind. She's everything I should have been proud of from the beginning. If anyone here has a problem with her, you'll answer to me." The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, years of pain and longing finally acknowledged. It was not enough to erase the past, but it was something. It was a start. Colton squeezed her hand. Emily was crying openly. And around the room, Sarah saw understanding dawning on faces, people recognizing, perhaps for the first time, exactly what they had allowed to happen, what they had been complicit in. The fiddler, uncertain how to respond to the heavy emotion, struck up a waltz. Colton immediately turned to Sarah. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Reed?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, you may." They moved on to the dance floor, and this time, there was no hesitation from the other couples. They joined in immediately, seamlessly, including Sarah and Colton as naturally as if they had always belonged. Sarah danced in Colton's arms, her father watching from the sidelines with tears on his face, her sister smiling. The town that had rejected her now welcoming her home. It was not perfect. Forgiveness was not instant. But it was progress, real and substantial progress. And as Sarah spun in her husband's arms, wearing her beautiful green dress, carrying her grandmother's watch and her unborn child, she felt something she had never felt before. She felt like she belonged. Not because they had finally accepted her, but because she had finally accepted herself. And that made all the difference. The dance continued around them, music and laughter filling the barn. Sarah danced with Colton, then with her father, an awkward but meaningful moment as Thomas held his daughter for the first time in public, both of them navigating unfamiliar territory. She danced with Emily's husband, with Jack Henderson, with several of the ranchers who had come to respect Colton's work. Between dances, people approached to speak with her. Some offered genuine apologies. Others simply wanted to make conversation, to treat her as they would any other woman in town. The preacher's wife, who had once led the opposition to Sarah's courtship, took her aside. "I need to tell you something," the older woman said, her voice low and urgent. "Something I should have told you years ago." They moved to a quieter corner of the barn. Sarah waited, uncertain what confession was coming. "My sister was different too. Not like you, but different. She had a twisted spine from birth, couldn't walk properly. My parents kept her hidden, just like your father kept you hidden. They said it was for her own good, that the world was too cruel. She died when she was 16, having never really lived at all." The woman's voice broke. "When I saw your father doing the same thing to you, I should have spoken up. I should have remembered my sister and fought for you. Instead, I joined the chorus of judgment. I convinced myself that hiding you was the kindest option because that's what I had always been told. But it was a lie. It was cruelty disguised as protection." Sarah felt her heart soften toward this woman who had caused her so much pain. "Why are you telling me this now? Because you need to know that not everyone who hurt you was doing it out of malice. Many of us were doing it out of fear and ignorance and the weight of our own failures. That doesn't excuse it, but it might help you understand." She squeezed Sarah's hand. "You're teaching us all something important. You're showing us that different isn't less, that courage matters more than conformity. Don't stop teaching us that lesson." Throughout the evening, more people approached with their own confessions and apologies. The baker admitted he had refused to sell to Margaret when she brought Sarah in once, and he regretted it. A ranch wife confessed she had told her children not to look at Sarah, teaching them fear instead of acceptance. One by one, the town was acknowledging its complicity, its failures, its capacity for cruelty. Sarah listened to each person with grace, neither absolving them too quickly nor rejecting them entirely. She was learning, in real time, how to hold people accountable while still allowing space for growth and change. Late in the evening, as Sarah was catching her breath between dances, Thomas approached with an uncomfortable expression. "There's someone who wants to speak with you. I told him I wasn't sure you'd want to, but he asked me to ask anyway." "Who?" "Judge Morrison, the man who married you and Colton." Sarah was surprised. The judge had been kind at her wedding, but they had not spoken since. She nodded, curious. Late in the evening, as Sarah was catching her breath between dances, Thomas approached with an uncomfortable expression. "There's someone who wants to speak with you. I told him I wasn't sure you'd want to, but he asked me to ask anyway." Asterisk. "Who?" "Judge Morrison, the man who married you and Colton." Sarah was surprised. The judge had been kind at her wedding, but they had not spoken since. She nodded, curious. The judge was an elderly man, 70 if he was a day, with kind eyes and a weathered face that spoke of a life fully lived. He gestured toward a bench outside the barn, where they could talk privately. Colton started to follow, but Sarah shook her head gently. Whatever this was, she needed to hear it alone. They sat in the cool spring air, the music from inside muted but still audible. The judge was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. "I need to give you something," he said finally, pulling a small leather pouch from his coat pocket. "These belong to your grandmother, Elizabeth." Sarah's breath caught. "You knew her?" "I did. I was young then, just starting my career as a lawyer. Elizabeth came to me once, asking about her legal rights, whether there was any way to protect herself from being institutionalized. Her family was threatening to have her committed to an asylum because of her appearance." His voice was heavy with old grief. "I helped her as much as I could, which wasn't much. The law wasn't kind to women back then, especially women who were considered defective." He opened the pouch and poured its contents into Sarah's palm. A small silver locket, tarnished with age, and a folded piece of paper. "She gave these to me the week before she died, made me promise to keep them safe. to give them to her granddaughter if she ever had one. She said she knew, somehow, that her suffering had a purpose, that it would help someone who came after her. That sounds like madness, maybe, but Elizabeth had a way of seeing things others couldn't. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the locket. Inside were 2 tiny photographs, one of Elizabeth herself, young and hopeful, and one of her husband, Sarah's grandfather. And behind the photographs, in careful script, were words: choose courage, choose love, choose life. She wrote that the day before she died, the judge said softly. She knew what she was going to do, and she was trying to leave something behind. Some message for whoever might need it. Sarah unfolded the paper. It was a letter addressed to my granddaughter, if God grants me one. The handwriting was shaky, emotional, but legible. My dear girl, it began. I do not know if you will ever exist, if my son will have children, if those children will carry the mark I carry. But if you are reading this, then you are like me. And I need you to know something I learned too late. You are not broken. You are not cursed. You are different, and different is not less. Different is simply different. I gave up because I could not see past the cruelty of the world around me. But you must not make my mistake. You must find someone who sees your worth, and you must build a life that honors your strength. Do not hide. Do not shrink. Do not let them make you invisible. Live loudly. Love deeply. Be brave. And know that I am cheering for you from wherever I am, hoping you succeed where I failed. Sarah read it twice, 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Her grandmother had left her this message 40 years ago, a beacon across time, a blessing from someone who understood her struggles in ways no one else could. She would be so proud of you, the judge said gently. You did exactly what she hoped you would do. You chose courage. You chose love. You chose life. And in doing so, you've redeemed her suffering, given it meaning. Thank you, Sarah whispered. Thank you for keeping these safe. For waiting all these years. It was my honor. He stood slowly, his joints stiff with age. You've changed this town, Mrs. Reed. Not just by being here, but by refusing to accept their limitations. You've made us all confront our own failures and prejudices. That's a powerful gift, even if it didn't always feel like one. After he left, Sarah sat alone for a few minutes, holding Elizabeth's locket and letter, feeling the weight of her grandmother's love reaching across decades. She had not just survived, she had thrived. She had broken the cycle of tragedy and written a new story, one where different women could find love, acceptance, and joy. Colton found her there, saw the tears and the treasures in her hands, and simply sat beside her, offering his silent support. After a while, Sarah told him everything about Elizabeth's letter, about the judge's revelation, about the message that had been waiting for her all these years. Your grandmother sounds like an extraordinary woman, Colton said. She was, and she died thinking she was a failure. But she wasn't. She was just born in the wrong time, in the wrong place, without the right people around her. Sarah clutched the locket tightly. I'm going to name our daughter after her. Elizabeth. If we have a daughter? Elizabeth Reed, Colton said, testing the name. That's beautiful. And if we have a son? Thomas, Sarah said, surprising herself. After my father. Not because he deserves it, but because names are about hope, not just honor. Hope that he'll be better than his grandfather, better than his namesake has been. Hope that we can break these cycles and build something new. They sat together in the spring darkness, the music from the dance drifting around them, the future spreading out before them bright with possibility. Sarah wore her grandmother's locket alongside her own pearl earrings. 2 generations of women, linked across time, their struggles and triumphs woven together into something larger than themselves. Inside the barn, Thomas stood watching the door, waiting for his daughter to return. He held his pocket watch, the one he had given to Sarah, in his hand, having asked to borrow it for the evening. He wanted to feel connected to his mother, to the woman whose tragedy had shaped his entire life. He wanted to believe that somehow, in some way, Elizabeth knew that her granddaughter was thriving, that her suffering had not been in vain. When Sarah and Colton returned, Thomas approached them. "There's one more thing I need to do," he said. "One more public acknowledgement." He climbed onto the small stage where the musicians had been playing, asked for silence. When the barn quieted, he began to speak. "My name is Thomas McKenna," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "Most of you know me as a businessman, a member of this community for over 30 years. But there's something you don't know about me, something I've kept hidden out of shame and fear. My mother was albino. Her name was Elizabeth, and she took her own life when I was 10 years old because people like us made her life unbearable." The barn was silent, every person frozen, listening. I watched what cruelty and judgment did to my mother. I found her body. I lived with that trauma my entire life. And when my daughter Sarah was born with the same condition, I was terrified. Terrified that she would suffer the same fate, that the world would break her the way it broke my mother. So I made a choice. A terrible, wrong choice. I decided to hide her, to keep her away from all of you, thinking I was protecting her from pain. His voice broke, but he continued. Instead, I became the source of her pain. I denied her a childhood. I denied her dignity. I denied her the chance to live freely and fully. I told myself it was love, but it was cowardice. I am more sorry for that than I can ever express. He pulled out the pocket watch, held it up for everyone to see. This watch was my father's gift to my mother. It says, "May you always have time for joy." My mother ran out of time for joy because all of us who judge and exclude and fear what we don't understand, we steal that time from people who are different. We rob them of joy, of life, of possibility. Thomas looked directly at Sarah. My daughter gave me back this watch. She gave me back more than I deserved. And I'm giving it to her now, publicly, as a promise that I will spend whatever time I have left making sure no one in this town ever feels invisible or ashamed for being who they are. That's the legacy I want to leave. Not the lumber mill or the money or the respectability. I want to leave a town that's learned to see people, really see them and value them for who they are, not what they look like. He descended from the stage and walked to where Sarah stood, holding out the watch. "This is yours, Sarah. It always should have been." Along with my apology, my acknowledgement, and my commitment to do better. Sarah took the watch, her hands shaking. The barn remained silent, people processing what they had just heard. Then, slowly, applause began, not celebratory, but acknowledging. Recognition of courage, of honesty, of the difficulty of public confession. The preacher stepped forward, his own face wet with tears. I think we all owe such acknowledgments. We all failed Sarah. We all participated in her isolation through our silence, through our acceptance of how things were, through our unwillingness to question whether our traditions and prejudices were just. Thomas isn't the only one who needs to apologize. We all do. One by one, people began coming forward. Not everyone. There were still those who stood back, arms crossed, faces set against change. But enough people came forward that Sarah was surrounded by neighbors and fellow townspeople, all offering their own versions of acknowledgement and regret. A young mother approached, holding a toddler on her hip. My daughter has a birthmark across half her face. I've been terrified of bringing her to town, terrified of what people will say. But watching you tonight, seeing your strength, it's given me courage. Thank you for that. Sarah touched the child's face gently, traced the red mark that splashed across her cheek. She's beautiful. Don't let anyone tell her otherwise. And don't hide her away. The world needs to learn to see beauty in all its forms, and they can't learn if we keep hiding. The woman nodded, tears in her eyes. I won't. I promise, I won't. An elderly rancher, known for his gruff manner, cleared his throat. My boy, my youngest son, he's not right in the head. Good heart, but simple. Can't do numbers or reading like other kids. I sent him away to live with my brother. Told myself it was for his own good. But watching this tonight, I realized I was ashamed. And that shame hurt him more than any difficulty he might have faced here. He looked at Thomas, then at Sarah. I'm bringing him home. He deserves to be with family. Story after story emerged. Secrets and shamans, people who had been hidden or excluded or taught to be ashamed of themselves. Sarah realized that her visibility, her refusal to hide, had given others permission to be visible too. She had become more than just herself. She had become a symbol, a living example that difference did not mean diminishment. Mrs. Dawson pushed through the crowd, her face fierce with emotion. This is what I've been waiting for. For years, I've watched this town be small and cruel and scared. But tonight we're being better. We're choosing to see instead of looking away. We're choosing courage over comfort. This is what community should be. The dance resumed, but it was different now. There was a weightiness to it, an acknowledgement that something significant had happened. People were not just dancing. They were participating in transformation, in the slow, difficult work of becoming better than they had been taught. Sarah danced again with Colton, her body tired but her spirit soaring. The central lantern in the barn cast warm light over everything, and in its glow, Sarah saw faces that had once been hostile or indifferent now looking at her with respect, with warmth, with acceptance. How do you feel? Colton asked as they moved together. Like I'm finally free, Sarah said. Not because they've accepted me, but because I've accepted myself so fully that their acceptance doesn't matter as much anymore. It's nice, but I don't need it. And that's the real freedom. As the evening drew to a close, Sarah stood under that central lantern with Colton beside her, her father nearby, Emily holding baby Maggie, Mrs. Dawson beaming with pride. Around them, the town that had rejected her was tentatively embracing her, learning to see with new eyes that it was not perfect. Change never was. There were still people who would never accept her, still prejudices that would take generations to undo. But it was progress, real and substantial. And Sarah had been the catalyst for that progress, simply by refusing to be invisible, by choosing to live fully and openly despite the cost. The final dance of the evening was announced a waltz, traditional and formal. Colton took Sarah's hand, led her to the center of the floor. Other couples joined them, moving in synchronized circles around the barn. And in that moment, under the warm glow of lanterns, surrounded by people who were learning to be better, Sarah felt something she had never felt before. She felt at peace, not because the struggle was over, it would never truly be over, but because she had won, not by changing herself to fit their expectations, but by being so fully herself that they had to change to accommodate her reality. That was the real victory. That was the real triumph. And as she danced in her husband's arms, wearing her grandmother's locket and carrying her unborn child, Sarah knew that she had honored Elizabeth's legacy. She had chosen courage. She had chosen love. She had chosen life. And in doing so, she had rewritten the story for every different person who would come after her, showing them that visibility was possible, that acceptance could be earned or built or simply claimed. That difference was not a curse, but a calling to be bravely, fully, unapologetically yourself. 6 months had passed since the spring dance, and the world had continued to turn. Summer had come and gone, painting the valley in shades of gold and green. Now autumn was returning, bringing with it the colors and cool air that Sarah had come to love. She stood in the doorway of their expanded cabin. Colton had added 2 rooms over the summer, preparing for the baby due in December, and watched the sun rise over the mountains. Her belly was round now, undeniable evidence of the life growing within her. She felt the baby move, a flutter and kick, and smiled at the sensation. The ranch had prospered. They now ran 40 head of cattle and had hired 2 more permanent hands. Sarah's embroidery business had grown beyond anything she had imagined, with orders coming from as far away as Denver. Women wanted pieces made by her, wanted to own something created by the woman who had become, somewhat accidentally, a symbol of courage and transformation. She had started teaching too. Twice a week, ranch hands and their families came to the cabin for reading lessons. Sarah had discovered a gift for teaching, a patience and clarity that helped even the most reluctant student. Some of the children who came were different themselves. A boy with a stutter, a girl with a limp, a child who saw the world differently than others. Sarah made sure they knew they belonged, that their differences were acknowledged but not limiting. Her teaching slate sat on the porch, covered with the day's lesson plans. Simple words and phrases, the building blocks of literacy. But to Sarah, they represented something more, the power of knowledge, of self-expression, of claiming your place in the world through words. Thomas visited regularly now. The relationship was still healing, still careful, but it was real. He had kept his promise, becoming an advocate for inclusion in the town, speaking up when others were excluded or judged. It did not erase his past failures, but it was creating a different future. Emily had become a true sister at last. She brought Maggie to visit often, and the little girl adored her Aunt Sarah, fascinated by her unusual appearance in the way only children could be, with wonder rather than judgment. Catherine had never reconciled, had moved away to live with distant relatives. Sarah grieved that loss, but had made peace with it. Some people were not ready to change, and that was their choice to make. Mrs. Dawson had become like a mother to Sarah, the relationship Margaret had never quite managed to build. The elderly woman visited weekly, bringing supplies and gossip and her sharp-eyed wisdom. She would hold court in Sarah's kitchen, dispensing advice and encouragement in equal measure. The town itself had changed. Not completely. There were still those who disapproved, who crossed the street to avoid Sarah, who held tight to their prejudices. But the overall atmosphere had shifted. More people spoke to her. Children no longer stared or pointed. Young mothers sought her advice. She was becoming part of the fabric of the community, woven in through courage and persistence and the simple act of showing up. Again and again. One afternoon in late October, a wagon pulled up to the ranch. A family Sarah did not recognize, a man, a woman, and a boy of about 7. The boy had albinism, his pale skin and white hair marking him as different. They approached the house tentatively, uncertain of their welcome. Sarah went out to meet them, Colton beside her. The man removed his hat, nervous. "Mrs. Reed? We heard about you from folks in Laramie. Heard you were like our son, and that you'd found acceptance here. We're looking to settle somewhere, and we thought maybe you're welcome here," Sarah said immediately. "More than welcome. Please, come inside. Let me make you coffee. Let me tell you our story." Over the next hours, she told them everything. The isolation, the rejection, the eventual triumph. She showed them the letters from Elizabeth, explained how courage could be inherited and built upon. She introduced them to the community, to Mrs. Dawson and the preacher who had apologized, to the families who had learned to see differently. The boy, shy at first, gradually warmed to Sarah. He asked questions about her skin, her eyes, her experiences. She answered honestly, neither minimizing the difficulties nor overstating them. By the end of the afternoon, he was sitting beside her on the porch, examining her embroidery work, asking if she could teach him. "I'd be honored," Sarah said. "I'll teach you embroidery, reading, anything you want to learn. And I'll make sure you know that you're not alone, that there are people who understand, who see you, who value you." The family decided to stay, to purchase land nearby and build their own ranch. Sarah and Colton helped them get established, using their own hard-won knowledge to ease the path. The boy, whose name was James, became a regular visitor to Sarah's teaching sessions, and gradually, other families with different children began seeking them out. Sarah found herself becoming something she had never expected: a leader, a teacher, a beacon for those who felt invisible or ashamed. It was not a role she had sought, but it was one she embraced. Her suffering had been transformed into purpose, her pain into power to help others. In early December, as the first snows began to fall, Sarah's labor began. It was long and difficult. Colton pacing outside while the midwife and Mrs. Dawson attended Sarah inside. But when the baby finally came, screaming her arrival to the world, everything else fell away. A daughter, perfect and healthy, with a shock of dark hair and her father's strong features. She had color, was not albino, but she carried her mother's strength in ways that went deeper than appearance. "Elizabeth," Sarah whispered, holding her daughter for the first time. "Elizabeth Margaret Reed." Colton sat beside them, his large hand cradling the baby's tiny head, tears streaming down his weathered face. "She's perfect. You're both perfect." Thomas came to visit a week later, holding his granddaughter with trembling hands. He wept openly. This man who had spent so long hiding his emotions. "Thank you," he said to Sarah. "Thank you for giving me this second chance, for letting me be part of her life. I promise I'll be a better grandfather than I was a father." "I know you will," Sarah said. "We all get chances to be better. What matters is what we do with them." The cabin filled with visitors over the following weeks. Emily brought Maggie to meet her cousin. Mrs. Dawson brought gifts. Ranch families brought food and congratulations. James and his parents came, the boy shyly holding the baby and declaring her very small but probably brave like her mother. Sarah sat in her rocking chair, nursing Elizabeth, watching snow fall outside the window. Colton sat beside her, his hand on her shoulder. Around them was evidence of the life they had built, the expanded cabin, the teaching slate, the embroidery stretched on frames, the photographs and mementos of family and history that she thought about her grandmother Elizabeth, whose suffering had cast such a long shadow. But that shadow was gone now, transformed into light. The cycle of tragedy had been broken. In its place was something new, a legacy of courage, of visibility, of refusing to accept limitations placed by others. "What are you thinking?" Colton asked softly. "I'm thinking about how far we've come. How a year ago I was hidden away, believing I was unworthy of love or a normal life. And now," she gestured at the room, at the baby in her arms, at the life surrounding them. "Now I have everything I never dared to dream of." "You created it," Colton said, "by being brave enough to reach for it." "We created it," Sarah corrected. "You, me, everyone who chose to change and grow. It's not just my story anymore. It's our story." Little Elizabeth stirred in her arms, making small sounds. Sarah looked down at her daughter and made a silent promise. This child would never know invisibility. She would never be taught to hide or to be ashamed. She would grow up knowing her worth, knowing her history, understanding the difference was not deficit, but simply another way of being human. And if this daughter happened to have children of her own someday, if those children carried the genes for albinism, they would grow up in a different world than Sarah had known. A world where a grandmother's courage had paved the way, where a mother's strength had broken chains, where love had proven stronger than fear. The sun was setting now, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of pink and gold. Sarah stood carefully, the baby in her arms, and walked to the open doorway. Colton joined her, his arm around her waist, supporting her as he always had. Together they looked out at their land, their life, their future. No longer hidden behind curtains, no longer watching the world from a distance, but standing in it fully, claiming their place beneath the vast Montana sky. Sarah touched the locket at her throat, Elizabeth's gift across time. She felt her grandmother's presence, a whisper of approval and joy. She had done it. She had chosen courage. She had chosen love. She had chosen life. And in doing so, she had rewritten the story for generations to come, proving that even the deepest wounds could heal, that even the darkest legacies could be transformed into light, that love, true, patient, persistent love could overcome anything. The baby in her arms would know this truth from birth, and that made all the difference.